At the beginning of the 23rd century, in the year 2203, Earth had entirely lost its magnetosphere and became uninhabitable. Billions died as a result of the United Colonies failing to evacuate the remaining population. This failure was likely due to the resources allocated to fight the ongoing Narian War. With the war coming to an end in the year 2216, it would be a mere few decades until the settled systems would become infested with piracy, led by a man known as Jasper Kryx. He would be imprisoned on a near inhospitable planet, suffering conditions that would fuel unrest within the prison's population. His eventual escape during his own instigated riot would birth the Crimson Fleet and a legacy that would last for over 100 years. Hello there, and welcome to another Starfield lore video, where we explore the history of the Crimson Fleet. Sometime prior to the Narian War, the United Colonies found the need for a maximum security facility for its most dangerous criminals. Not desiring this installation to be near the populated human worlds, the facility was constructed within the remote Kryx system on the planet of Suvorov. Suvorov houses a frozen ecosystem and is orbited by 7 moons, as well as a UC star station known as the Key. The Key's position in orbit was crucial to operations on the ground. With weather conditions on the surface being hostile, it was important to maintain a presence in orbit. From here, ships carrying reinforcements and supplies could quickly descend on the facility to aid when needed. The prison facility itself would be known as the Lock. On the surface, the Lock appeared as a small installation. Upon arriving, prisoners would be greeted by yellow reinforced walls, a giant metal gate, and a massive antenna, and a large metal plate on the surface to where shuttles descend. On approach to the main entrance would be many offices and guard stations. On top of the facility would be a short-range scanner observing the skies for hostile vessels, with an anti-ship battery located nearby. With heavily armed guards at their posts, mines were littered in the area leading up to the prison gates for those who would attempt to infiltrate the facility. First sight upon entering the facility is an observation booth overlooking the entrance. Next to it is a large stairwell descending down into the prison itself, which is built into the crust of the planet. At these levels, the temperature plummets. For life to be sustained, heating units were built into the facility. Though, as the decades went on, a low budget led to insignificant resources to maintain the units. To combat the deteriorating conditions, the Lock invested in portable units, but prisoners began to reverse engineer the units into weapons, and they too eventually were removed. Just down the stairs on the right side was inmate processing. The last staff to work here was Chief Security Officer Sally Pritchard. Some of the last entries in the processing computer system was logged procedures stating changes to the prisoner arrival procedures, which stated that prisoners were first required to submit to a DNA dentikit, which results would be compared to records transmitted from the Key, which suggests prisoners first arrived at the Key, then processed to the Lock. Secondly, the procedural changes required secure leg and arm restraints, then to remove transfer restraints. Physicians were then to perform examinations, vaccinations, and embed a subdermal tracking tag to the inmate. From there, the prisoner would be taken to the intake area, where they would receive psychological evaluations, prison uniforms, and a cell. After processing, the depository for inmates or staff items were located just on the opposite side, with multiple doors around the lobby area leading from A through D block, air exchange, workroom, and storage areas. At the time of the Crimson Fleet faction quest, only the barracks are accessible directly following the introduction. The hall toward the barracks also gave access to the control room, power plant, and armory. Prior to the collapse of the facility, intake would have been accessible directly next to the depository. Here, after various medical tasks, the inmates' documents would be deposited into the records before proceeding into D block. From the intake waiting area, the prisoner could nearly view the entirety of the facility. Carved completely out of ice, access to D block required walking barely safe walkways, overlooked by large guard towers and observation boxes. It was nearly intolerable, Logs on the intake computer mentions the deteriorating conditions from the wardens, such as temperatures in some areas of the prison being near 0 degrees Celsius. The staff were forced to endure with the prisoners while waiting to receive aid from New Atlantis. All that was available were portable heating units from the key. After processing, inmates simply descended into the block to their cells. While the prisoners went their way through intake, back near processing was the barracks entrance hall, which directly led to the staff kitchen and then to the barracks itself. While much of the prison was simply carved out of freezing rock, this area of the prison was built to withstand the freezing temperatures outside. From the barracks, guards were able to access the shuttle bay, control tower, and the warden's office on the opposite side of the kitchen area. Essentially, this location gave direct access to the entirety of the underground complex. While the staff enjoyed this access from their barracks, the warden's office was secluded, granted only direct access to the shuttle bay. The warden himself enjoyed the luxury of not having to share his personal space with others, and his office was just right outside. In the final days of his reign over the block, his logs expressed dissatisfaction with the United Colonies' abandonment of the prison. Insufficient supplies and financing caused a deteriorating situation, all just before the arrival of a curious inmate known as Jasper Kryx. Tom Gillespie's log on the status of his prison says this: "The latest supply ship has just departed, and I'm livid. I simply don't understand how you, directed to Arseny Belenkov, UC Security, expect me to run this prison without proper equipment. The heating system is inadequate. The water filtration units are constantly malfunctioning, and we have insufficient automated security to bolster our overtaxed guards. I have no idea why my repeated requests are being denied. I'm not running an adventure camp here, Arseny. People are dying. Please let me know you'll be filling my requests, or you can find someone else to run this place." From the processing into the barracks hall to the power plant was the control room, which operated many machines keeping the facility afloat. It was shared by the event supervisor, Warren Harishman, who oversaw recreation activities for the entire facility. On his workstation are complaints to the warden about prisoner birthday celebrations, which often turned violent and destructive. While not having much of a role, Harishman operated a trivia contest for the prison. Down the hall from the power plant was the armory, where guards would gather their gear before heading into C Block. Unfortunately, for what I have discovered, A through C Block have been crushed under ice and are inaccessible. For the player, only D Block is accessible, and only D Block is mentioned in the logs regarding the facility. It is likely this is because D Block is considered to be the most dangerous block of the prison. Among the inmates were various terms and slangs. For example, day shift meant an inmate was serving a life sentence. 24/7 meant a life sentence without a chance of parole. Airlock meant sentenced to death. Hit is a person sentenced with a limited duration. Fire suit were prison jumpsuits, which were yellow. Coolant was prison-made alcohol. Grav jump referred to the effects of illicit substances, and jettison was a term used for the restroom. Facility personnel were aware of this, but kept the knowledge to themselves. While the warden attempted to gather resources from New Atlantis, prisoners were hard at work arming themselves. Weapons were being carved out of chunks of permafrost from cell block walls. Thermal coils from portable heating units were being repurposed to create other types of weaponry. Therefore, the heating units were removed from the cells. Eventually, the conditions of the prison would reach a breaking point, with the staff on demand, mechanized machines and auto turrets in small number, the prison population in unrest. A riot was all but inevitable. Jasper Kryx's youth is largely unknown, aside from news interviews with the organization SSNN. To summarize, Jasper Kryx, likely born on the capital world of the United Colonies, Jemison, began his life of crime at a young age. By the time he reached 20, Kryx had become the leader of a little but well-known gang called the Crimson Scar. The Crimson Scar, at first, was restricted to planetside operations, but eventually acquired an abundance of wealth, enough to finance a small fleet of ships. Despite this success, Kryx continued his crime spree, which landed him in the crosshairs of the UC Council. In a short time, he would be captured, tried, and sentenced to endure the harsh conditions of the lock. At the time, the lock had been pushed to its limits. New Atlantis was reluctant to send resources to the facility, especially with the Darien War being only decades old. A Cold War was brewing. Research in mechanized and xeno warfare was prioritized. Rebuilding the defeated and wounded UC fleet was far more important than sustaining a remote prison facility on the outer edges of the settled systems. The lock operated almost entirely on reserves. Being one of the most dangerous criminals in the lock, Kryx was assigned to D-Block on the lower levels. It wouldn't be long before Kryx's influence and staff dissatisfaction would lead to disaster for the rest of the UC officers stationed there. It seemed the only individuals to take notice of Kryx would be Warden Gillespie. He would inquire into Kryx's past, where he would find this: 26 counts of burglary, 18 counts of criminal interference with UC property, 33 counts of theft in minor degree, 24 counts of theft in major degree, 8 counts of arson, 1 count of indecent exposure, 78 counts of destruction of property, 105 counts of aggravated assault, 18 counts of attempted murder, 93 counts of second-degree murder, and 24 counts of first-degree murder. With such a record, the warden informed his guards to keep a special watch on Kryx. Eventually, they would find a cache of weapons in the D-Block cell area, which they would lock via a guard computer in the lookout above the prison kitchen area. It would prove to be a distraction, as Kryx earlier in his sentence would meet another inmate who told him a precious secret. By this time, the Darien War had come to an end. To make amends for the war after the military defeat but diplomatic victory, the United Colonies allowed Galbank, a banking entity, to deliver an abundance of credits to the Free Star Collective. The ship would be known as the Legacy. It would, in time, disappear for unknown reasons, hidden within the records of Galbank itself. Hearing this story, Jasper Kryx began to organize his escape. With the conditions in the lock being at their lowest, disapproving guards began to falter, feeding Kryx information about security operations around the prison. Carefully, Kryx made alliances with the prisoners of D-Block. Using the shower area, he exchanged messages with the staff and other inmates. Their plan was to use their access to the ventilation control room to mine directly into the lock's armory. From there, they would fight their way across the complex to gain control of the shuttles on the surface. In the year 2241, the plan was set in motion. The diggers from the ventilation area dug through the armory wall and acquired nearly the entirety of the lock's weaponry. Hall to hall, the prisoners fought with the guards, sending the entire prison into lockdown. But before that happened, many of the prisoners had already reached the barracks. To this day, bodies are seen scattered across the lock, demonstrating just how far the prisoners had gotten in such a short time. After much sacrifice, the prisoners reached the craft on the surface, then proceeded to the key, where they took control of the station. Suffering from low funding, inadequate defenses, and a short supply of personnel, the lock, the key, were quickly overwhelmed. Gearing up for the next potential war, the United Colonies refused to send aid to the facility. Despite the warden's warnings, the prisoner uprising, and the takeover of 2 government facilities, their sights were still set on the Free Star Collective. This inaction by the United Colonies would birth the Crimson Fleet. In a short time, the UC began to have their shipping lanes attacked by pirates, outposts raided, and numbers to this new enemy swelled. Kryx would go on to look for the legacy Galbank transport that housed the fortune. With it, he would forge a new empire from his pirate fleet, one unable to be contested by the United Colonies and Free Star Collective. After much searching, Kryx's journey would lead him to Barnock 4. Barnock 4 is a gas giant in the Barnock system. Unfortunately for Kryx, Barnock 4 has an EM field, which the Galbank transport had become trapped in. While not threatening to the whole integrity of the ship, the EM field will cause the ship to lose all power and to become stranded within the field. Kryx believed he would be able to navigate this field to retrieve the transport's credits. By the time Kryx had arrived, the crew on the ship were already dead, with the ship's automated defenses still active. Without issue, Kryx battled his way to the credit vault, to where he faced a grim reality. Like the Legacy, he too had become trapped in the orbit of Barnock 4. While he attempted to escape, all his efforts were in vain, as the ship's engines and grav drive all failed. There, at the heart of his life's prize, all the credits in the galaxy meant nothing. His final hope was for his second-in-command to rescue him. Weeks would pass. Kryx would exhaust his resources completely. All he had for comfort was audio logs he left behind for the Void. Unsure if anyone would ever read his journey to the Legacy, his second-in-command had betrayed him and took the Crimson Fleet for herself. Over 100 years would pass. Kryx would become intertwined with the Legacy itself. He would become a myth within the Crimson Fleet that they would know as Kryx's legacy. Jasper's Crimson Fleet would go on to plague the settled systems. It would set its sights eventually on a freighter transport. The captain of this freighter would be escorted by his son. Without warning, their attack would result in the destruction of the transport, the theft of goods, and all that would remain is the tormented memories of the son. He would grow up to become the individual known as Commander Akande of the United Colonies System Defense. It is Commander Akande who recruits the player to infiltrate the Crimson Fleet, where the modern-day leader, Delgado, trusts you to help him find Kryx's legacy. The chess game between Akande and Delgado has been going on for years. While Delgado comes from a rich family, his troubled past cost him his family's wealth. The death of Akande's family puts him on the path to avenge his father. The two both have lost their families, and both are at odds with each other, and the conclusion to their journey comes at the decision of the player. For my personal choice, in my first playthrough, I joined the Crimson Fleet over Sysdef. At the time, I hadn't fully explored the Vigilance, and understood just how wounded Commander Akande had become by the loss of his father. Even after siding with him in my second playthrough, he still felt his task was not finished, that he still could not look up at the sky and dream as a child as he once did before. It changed my perception of him, from a heartless military commander to a journey of redemption. As for Delgado, on my second playthrough, I never realized just how much faith Delgado has in the player. If you choose to betray him unexpectedly, he isn't just accepting of this fact that he's been betrayed. He's emotionally wounded. Despite being a criminal and a murderer, his belief in what the Crimson Fleet could become relied on his faith in you to do what he thought was justified. He saw in you the family he once lost, only to be betrayed and disposed of. The United Colonies during the Narian War discarded their incarcerated offenders to the freezing conditions of Soveroth. There, they chose to rally behind Jasper Kryx rather than freeze to death or be eaten by the aliens that lurked within the surface. They would take the key and give birth to the Crimson Fleet that threatened the settled systems and could, quite possibly, become the fourth dynamic power in the galaxy. The betrayal of Kryx by his second-in-command would delay this possible outcome for over 100 years. Decades of history which would come down all to your decision. Thank you for watching. If you watched this far, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a comment. I'll see you next time.